Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and today we're going to be talking about some late round sleepers for 2021 fantasy football. These guys, just to preface, before we get started, they're not world beaters. They're not guys that you're going to put in your lineups and start them every single week. These are just players that are going incredibly late in drafts, potentially might go undrafted in leagues, because today I'm looking at players who are just going in round 16 plus of 12-team leagues. So we've got some pretty significant ADP depth here, and these again are players who in your standard 8-10-man leagues are most likely going to be waiver wire pickups. So deep sleepers, that's the name of the game today. These players do, though, have some value that might make them streaming options at some point this season or give them the potential to emerge as players down the road. Again, one more time, they're not going to be week one world beaters, come out here, win your leagues on their own, but they can contribute to the puzzle here and help make our lives easier this fantasy season. So without further ado, drop a like on today's video, subscribe if you're new around here, let's hit that intro and get right in to the players. Alrighty, here we go today, kicking things off with our first player. Just want to say welcome into the new display here on the channel. Hopefully today the microphone is not muted like it was yesterday for the first couple minutes. Don't worry, I went ahead and checked that off, and obviously you're watching this right now. So everything's fine and dandy if you don't know what I'm referring to. The first couple minutes of Mock Draft Monday were interrupted and had to be recorded via voiceover because when we made the new display, we didn't turn the microphone on and it was a big mess. So we've got a new look here today. Hopefully you enjoy the new presentation style. But here we are with our new players. So Jacoby Myers is the first guy I want to talk about on the board today. Myers is being very slept on. He's a name I barely ever hear in the fantasy community being tossed out around there. But for a player right now who the depth charts for teams are very fluid right now and they're very flexible. They're constantly changing and evolving. But he's been a starting name on that list throughout the entirety of this offseason. They did bring in a lot of free agents. They did make a lot of moves this offseason. And not only the wide receiver position, but the tight end spots as well. But I still think he'll be a fairly integral part of this offense. Jacoby isn't a player I love for his ceiling. And as a matter of fact, I don't think the ceiling is all that great here. But what I do like is the floor he presents, the dependability he has, and he's starting to sort of become a veteran in the NFL now. I remember back to in his rookie years playing with Tom Brady and being a younger player. He's still very young, but he is relatively experienced in the league at this point. He's still rated as, or not rated, but he is currently penciled in as the number 2 wide receiver behind Nelson Aguilar in this offense, who conversely, I would say his floor isn't so hot and his ceiling is better. There's a lot of Pats on today's list, and there has been throughout the offseason, because I think that offense is being slept on in terms of the fantasy value and production potential it has. It's not going to be the Chiefs. We're not looking at the Packers from 2020. We're not looking at some of the other high-volume teams like the Buccaneers. But this is a group that still has some quality players. They definitely have pieces that can be streamed on occasion here. And we're talking about a player who had a 23% target share, albeit in a run-heavy offense. He still was amongst the most thrown to players on this Pats roster. He caught 59 of his 81 targets last season, had 729 yards, only 2 touchdowns. That goes back to kind of the limited ceiling factor here, but he did pass for a touchdown as well, which is fairly unusual. I believe he has some quarterback in his track record from earlier on in his playing days, whether it was back in college or high school, I forget. But still, this is a very nice, just all-around solid player. He's a fairly good route runner. I wouldn't classify him as elite at any particular skill or trait. But again, he has enough of the tools we need here to be productive in a PPR league. Maybe he's a flex 1 or flex 2 option, and he can just give us some week-to-week numbers. Again, these players are not every week starters, but they are guys that can come in and contribute for a multi-week stretch if you need be that level of usage in your fantasy lineups. The number 2 player I've got here, good old Taysom Hill. I forgot to mention Jacoby Myers' ADP as well. That was 204th overall. Taysom Hill's just behind him, and this does go in order in today's video, at the 208th overall pick via SleeperFantasy.com's half PPR ADP. Remember back to the times when Taysom Hill last season was able to be started in lineups as a tight end option. I don't necessarily think that ESPN, Yahoo, any of those major platforms out there will ever let us use him in that way again, since he is being currently used as a legitimate quarterback in camp. But that doesn't mean that on the field he won't be used in a similar light. Again, we are not going to be starting Taysom Hill on a week-to-week basis, but this is still a player who might be a bench stash in deeper leagues and at some point could get a start, therefore making him a must-add player off the waiver wire, because with his ability as a gadget, trick play, offensive weapon, he can come in here, catch touchdown passes out of the tight end position. He'll line up as a fullback, a running back every once in a while. He'll split out wide as a receiver. And again, is it really too far out of the picture to think that maybe if Jameis Winston is named the team starter, and by all means, this makes things all that much better if Taysom Hill is named the day one starter, because then you can kind of compare him to a Jalen Hurts-esque player. Neither of them are elite passers, but both of them have this really strong ground game going for them. I personally don't think it'll work and translate to wins, but it will translate to fantasy wins because the production and the statistical production will be there and give us what we need to have a little bit of an edge in our leagues. But nonetheless, that's besides the point. All I'm projecting here is the fact that if Jameis is named the starter, Taysom's still going to have that offensive weapon role and involvement on the team. Maybe at some point, if he's not the starting quarterback for long enough, ESPN would entertain, or at other fantasy platforms, Sleeper, Yahoo, NFL Fantasy app, they might put him back to that multi-use player role for us so we can use him in flex spots or whatnot. But again, the main point here, maybe we get a start or two at quarterback out of Taysom here. If Jameis has a stinker, continues to have interception problems, can't be mature enough, whatever it might be, I just think there's a lot of ways Taysom can get on the field this season and be utilized as a legitimate fantasy weapon. So, moving on to the next player up here, I have got Randolph Stevenson being drafted with the 214th overall pick, and it might not look like on paper that this Pats offense is or rather the backfield. I mean, I talked about their offense as a whole might not seem all that entertaining and might not be a big fantasy draw for us. But this backfield in particular is something that I think is a big smokescreen. It's hard to break apart. And at the end of the day, the most success I've had assessing this Patriots backfield is finding the greatest strength of each of their individual players and associating that with their fantasy value. For example, Damian Harris is not a strong pass catcher. He's also not a great change of pace back. That makes him a first and second down, solid floor play player who will probably see the most volume in this offense, but he won't see much additional production. Conversely, James White is not a very good between the tackles rusher. He's not a player that you're going to bring in to lead the offense unless you're weaker and thinner due to injuries with those other backs. He comes in as the third down pass catching runner for this team, and he's not necessarily a traditional running back. Really, the main time we saw him used in that fashion was in the Super Bowl against the Falcons, but guess why he was on the field? They were trailing for a lot of that game. They needed their pass-catching player in there because that's what their offense became heavily predicated upon in that situation. Randolph Stevenson, for me, is the absolute spitting image of LeGarrette Blount. He literally almost looks like him, minus having even longer dreads, a massive beard, and he's just a tank. Randolph Stevenson is going to be the goal line back, the third down and short yardage situation, bruiser who runs straight up the middle. His only job is to get positive yardage. He doesn't need to break off a 60-yard run. That's not his job again. He's coming in here, and this is probably just exclusively a standard league play because I don't expect him to come in, catch passes. I've seen him do that in college at a somewhat decent level at Oklahoma, but his job, again, is going to be the LeGarrette Blount role, the goal line. If this offense can get down there, he will be the touchdown player. This is a standard league play once again. We're not looking at him in PPR leagues. You can probably almost disregard him. But at some point this season, if that Pats backfield gets dinged up, there's a lot of guys missing from that unit. Stevenson's a player to keep your eye on for as a guy who will be utilized in the most valuable area of the field for fantasy purposes. Malcolm Brown is that same type of player. Again, we might not and probably are not drafting Malcolm Brown in any league format outside of deep standard leagues, but keep your eye out for him on the waiver wire. Myles Gaskin, the current starter for the Miami Dolphins, only played 10 games in 2020, and he's got, much to many people's unawareness, some of the highest mileage on his legs of any player in the NFL at his age because of the touch load he saw in college. So there's a greater chance that his body wears down. He's a smaller back, better used out in space as a pass catcher. Get him running off tackle. You don't want him running in between your center and guard because that's where all the big bodies are at falling on him. Malcolm Brown's job is going to be those plays. Malcolm Brown is going to be the player who comes in. Unfortunately, Salvon Ahmed, as good as he was in relief of Gaskin last season, has been bumped back to the third string role. And Brown will do the exact same thing he did for the Rams. If you were a Todd Gurley owner, if you were a Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson owner last season, you know how annoying this guy was on the goal line, punching in 1 to 2 yard scores, having multi-touchdown games, just snatching up that goal line volume. He's a much bigger player than Myles Gaskin. I expect him to have relative usage in that area of the field all season long, and if Gaskin misses more time than we expect, again, only played 10 games last year, as a rookie, it's not like he is a shoo-in to get hurt again, but this is a player who has a lot of volume because of his potential usage and skill set in those standard or maybe even half PPR leagues. So there's definitely standalone value with Brown all season long, and if we're talking 12-plus team leagues, you definitely want to have your eye out for him and maybe even stash him on the bottom of your bench just in case. Nico Collins. This one is one of the most interesting players for me on today's list, and I've been really interested in exactly how he will be used for this Texans offense all offseason long. When just checking up on depth charts, looking into beat reporters and all of the news coming out of training camps for various teams, Nico Collins caught my eye. I had him ranked fairly highly in the Rookie Dynasty Draft Guide and those rankings for the sole purpose that, albeit he's a 5th-round pick out of Michigan, a player who didn't have unworldly stats in college, he does something that I think is very unique to this offense. He has a skill set, a size, a play style that is very contrasting to the Brandon Cooks, the Kiki QTs, the Anthony Millers on that roster right now. They did bring in Chris Conley, but I still think that Collins has a shot here, and he's currently penciled in as a starter for this Texans team. He was the wide receiver 2, not exactly what you would love to see. He has been moved down to that 3rd spot. Again, it's training camp. Things are changing rapidly, and they're very fluid. So there's a chance here that come the end of August, he's moved back down, and we see Miller or QT step into that 3rd spot. But why do I like Collins in this offense? The Texans in 2020 led the NFL in passing yards. Yes, part of that is attributed, and most of it, I will give credit where it's due, is attributed to the fact that you have top-end quarterback play in Deshaun Watson. He was the singular leader in passing for an individual last season, so D-Watt led the NFL in passing yards. That's not going to be quite as valuable and as lucrative of an offense for fantasy if Watson isn't at the helm. But as of yesterday, he was back at practice with his shoulder pads on and has reportedly recovered from this ankle injury that was keeping him out last week. So he's out there. He's on the field. As long as the allegations don't materialize into anything, I think Watson will play for somebody this season. Obviously, it's less likely that it's the Texans than anyone else, but he is there practicing, and I think that it would be kind of a stretch to say he's not going to practice for this team all offseason long just to not play for them come September. So there's a chance he still has that top-end quarterback play, but back to Collins as an individual, why I like him so much. Again, obviously, there's drop-off here for all of those Texans pass catchers if Watson's not the quarterback, but the value is all the better if he is. Collins is a big-bodied, contested catch weapon who can go down the red zone, give you the big size and the big frame you're looking for to go up and make those grabs in tight spaces. He's not a world beater. This, again, was a 5th-round pick, so not a player that's going to come in here, be highly coveted, force-fed the ball. But I think with opportunity, he can prove himself here. And when you're looking at players like back to Brandon Cooks, a very solid veteran, but not exactly your prime red zone target or prime red zone threat. Chris Conley is a veteran journeyman. He's had nice stints, but he's not going to be the top dog in this offense. Brandon Cooks will be that if it's anyone. But Collins can be the player in here that can lead this team potentially in touchdown receptions, be the used player in this area of the field, and carve out a situational role for himself, whether it be inside the 20-yard line, stretching the field and going up and making a grab. Whatever it is, I think there's something for him to be had in this Texans offense here, especially if he maintains that role as a starter. So keep your eye out for Collins in all league formats. He could potentially turn into one of the higher upside plays on this list. Tyrell Williams is the next name up here. His ADP is 228th overall. Look, going back to the whole depth chart situation, I expect him to be an opening day starter as he is currently the wide receiver 1 for the Detroit Lions offense. As opposed to some of these other younger names, he is a vet. He is a player who has proven track record in the NFL. This guy is not an all-out superstar by any stretch of the imagination. His only 1,000-yard season, and he did have one, which is worth noting, was 5 seasons ago in 2016 for the Chargers. But it is important that that season happened. He had over 110 targets that year. He had, I believe, 59 receptions and just barely broke the 1,000-yard threshold. But it shows he has some talent. He has the ability to make plays. He was held out all season last year for the Raiders and was actually cut because of the inability to play due to a shoulder injury, I believe it was. So coming back, he's had a full year of rest. He's going to hopefully come in healthy to camp this season. He's probably not in his absolute prime. And I do think Amon-Ra St. Brown and Quintez Cephas, 2 younger names in this Lions offense, will make a run at carving out legitimate target shares for themselves and being involved in the passing game here in Detroit with Jared Goff. But I think Williams will be the easy option here in an offense you don't particularly love at face value, but there could still be something to be had here. Looking back, one of the most slept on players the last 2 seasons that I love to take advantage of, grab up off the waiver wires, draft late in my leagues, that was so productive for me when he was on the field, was Jamison Crowder, who played for one of the worst overall offenses in the league, but just being the number 1 option in an offense and being that he was the go-to guy for that team gave him the volume to make the plays he needed and come out here and produce starting level numbers in some fashion. Not a wide receiver 1 for fantasy, not even a wide receiver 2, but you can pencil him in as a flex. If you've got a 2-flex league, he can certainly fill that role for you. So if Williams just carves out enough of opportunity for himself in Detroit, he will absolutely be a competent option for us and a player that, again, going with a 228th overall pick is major. I don't necessarily want to say his upside overall is major, but at that draft position is a very valuable pick. Cam Newton, my next quarterback up on the board today. This one's a fairly simple argument. I mean, the job in New England is Cam's to lose, so as long as he produces, he's going to keep that job. And I think that if he plays the way he did as a passer last season, he will lose it sooner rather than later to Mac Jones. But the thing that's encouraging for me is it's Cam's second year in this offensive system. Quarterbacks are always better in year 2 than in year 1. He was excellent and a top fantasy producer prior to him getting COVID early on last season. And I think that with the valuable asset he has as a runner and the incredible numbers he put up on the ground last season early on in particular, we don't want to project that for the entire season, but it gives us reason to be hopeful and optimistic for what he can do in a collective year if he A, stays healthy, B, takes steps forward as a passer, and C, can take advantage of the influx of talent that the Pats have added this offseason. Again, this is the 3rd Patriot on today's list. We've got 8 total names, so nearly half the board here, and half of it exactly is players from the NFC East. But the point I'm trying to make here, with Cam Newton particularly, is that there are multiple reasons to expect him to be more consistent, to be less streaky, to give us a higher floor. And as a player who finished as QB 17 last year, that's a middle-of-the-pack quarterback too. Even in 12-team leagues, if you're carrying a second quarterback on your roster, he's probably worth the roster spot. And whether it's simply just picking him up to stream him if he goes undrafted in your leagues against, I don't know, the Jets or another team that the Pats have a very light schedule with this season, you can certainly find value here. He only had 8 touchdown passes in 15 games last season. That is atrocious numbers, like worst of the worst to 10 interceptions, but rushing he had 12. So there's definitely value. He can improve upon that. They went out and signed a couple receivers. I think Aguilar will help him stretch the field, hopefully. And him and Jacoby Myers did have a connection last year. That's where Jacoby Myers comes from off this list. He might even be better if Mac Jones were at the helm, to note that quickly. And then the fact that you bring in two very, very good tight ends, Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, who will help this run game, who will help Cam, who has done very well with players like Greg Olsen in the past in his career. I just think that overall this situation has taken multiple steps forward this season. I think Bill Belichick, having had Tom Brady for all but one of his NFL seasons to this point, obviously entering year 2 without him, knows that waiting a year on the quarterback, developing his skills, refining his football IQ, and making sure Mac Jones is good upstairs before he hits the field, I think he recognizes how important that makes Cam to this team and his ability to lead the franchise for one more season here in a transition or bridge year, whatever you might call it. So the last name I've got here is Marquez Callaway. I've been talking for weeks about Adam Troutman and Traquan Smith post finding out about that Michael Thomas injury. Look, I traded for MT in a couple leagues and drafted him even late after hearing that news, but man, is he ever a diva. It's just so frustrating to listen to all of the childish gimmicks he pulls against the Saints, who, to all accounts, and to my eye test, are a stand-up organization. I don't think Drew Brees would have stuck for them for his entire career if they weren't that. So, besides the point here, but reportedly, in the absence of MT at Saints training camp, Marquez Callaway has stepped up as the top dog and really grasped a hold of the value in this offense for fantasy purposes. And according to multiple beat reporters, again, is playing confidently in that number 1 role. So that's not to say Marquez Callaway is a number 1 talent in the National Football League, but the good news is here that he has started 3 NFL games. That's very, very small of a sample size, but he did have a performance in October last season where he had 8 receptions on 10 targets for 75 yards. So he's at least serviceable here. This, again, is a player who might not start for you every week, but if you simply want to, maybe you drafted Michael Thomas and you have an IR spot that you can stash him away on your bench. After your league draft is over, move MC into that IR spot, go pick up Marquez Callaway, and use him on your team in the absence against good matchups while Thomas is recovering, getting healthy, working his way back onto the field. There's a potential here that he puts up borderline wide receiver 2 numbers, and you could be looking at a nice lineup start. Maybe you're not starting him against Tampa Bay or some of the harder matchups and opponents on the Saints schedule, but there's definitely opportunity to be had here. And as a player who is going incredibly late in drafts, there's no reason not to take Marquez at his current ADP if your league does carry through to that point on the draft day. Alrighty, there is my list of 8 deep fantasy sleepers for the 2021 fantasy football season. Make sure if you enjoyed today's video to drop a like here and subscribe if you're new to the SFS channel. Also, if you'd like a more personalized and interactive experience with us here on the SFS channel, drop down into the description of today's video and join the free community Discord invite link where you can get yourself hooked up with some giveaway opportunities, live mock drafts with me here on the channel, and other great stuff, fantasy analysis, setting up subscriber leagues, and just chatting with me when I've got some free time. So thank you all so much for watching. Let me know down in the comment section below if you've got any fantasy questions, any other deep sleeper candidates for me, or anything to add on today's video. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.